The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched before Ambassador Krell like a cathedral to civilization itself. Holographic displays flickered along the curved walls, showing star systems, trade routes, and the territories of 300 member species. The air hummed with translation matrices, allowing beings from across the galaxy to communicate in real time. Krell adjusted his ceremonial robes and tried to ignore the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. Today would mark humanity's formal rejection of Council membership. The thought seemed impossible, yet here he stood, preparing to deliver the message that would doom his species to isolation. Councillor Vraxt of the Thurian Collective floated at the center podium, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into dancing patterns. She had served the Council for 200 standard years, longer than any human civilization had existed. Her voice, when it came through the translation matrix, carried the weight of that experience. "We gather to finalize humanity's integration into galactic society," Vraxt announced. The chamber fell silent. Representatives from hundreds of worlds turned their attention to the small human delegation seated in the applicant section. "The terms are generous. We offer protection, technology, and trade access beyond anything your species has achieved alone." Krell watched from his position near the back of the human group. Admiral Sarah Chen sat at the front, her military uniform sharp and unadorned. Next to her, Dr. Marcus Webb fidgeted with his datapad, probably reviewing the documents one final time. Behind them, the rest of Earth's delegation waited with expressions ranging from hopeful to terrified. The terms were indeed generous by Council standards. Humanity would gain access to faster-than-light communication networks, medical technology that could extend human lifespans by centuries, and defensive capabilities that would make Earth nearly invulnerable to outside attack. In exchange, they would merely need to accept Council oversight of their military, surrender their independent foreign policy, and restructure their economy to match Council standards. Small concessions, Vraxt had called them during the negotiations. Standard requirements for all member species, nothing to concern themselves about. Admiral Chen rose slowly from her seat. The translation matrix picked up her movement, and a spotlight illuminated her position. 300 species watched as she walked to the speaking platform, her boots clicking against the polished floor with military precision. "Councillor Vraxt," Chen began, her voice steady. "The people of Earth have reviewed your terms carefully. We've consulted with our governments, our scientists, our philosophers, and our citizens. We've debated for months about the future we want for humanity." Vraxt's crystalline form pulsed with satisfaction. "And you've wisely chosen to join us. The documents merely require your signature." "No," Chen said simply. The single word echoed through the chamber. Krell felt his heart skip a beat. Around the room, representatives stirred, confused muttering rising from dozens of species. Vraxt's form stopped pulsing. "Clarify your statement, Admiral." "Humanity rejects Council membership under the proposed terms. We will not surrender our sovereignty, our military independence, or our right to determine our own future." Chen's hands remained clasped behind her back, her posture parade ground perfect. "We thank the Council for their offer, but we must decline." The chamber erupted. Voices overlapped, translation matrices struggled to keep pace, and several representatives stood in shock or outrage. Krell buried his face in his hands. They'd actually done it. The madness that had infected Earth's leadership had followed them here to the very heart of galactic civilization. Councillor Thane of the Borillian Empire stood, his massive form towering over most other representatives. "This is unprecedented. Species do not reject Council membership. The benefits are too substantial, the alternatives too dangerous." "We understand the risks," Chen replied calmly. "Do you?" Vraxt's voice turned sharp, the musical quality vanishing. "Your species controls 14 colony worlds, Admiral. Your technology is centuries behind Council standard. Your military consists of primitive kinetic weapons and fusion drives. Without Council protection, you are vulnerable to the Kresh Dominion, to pirate fleets, to corporate exploitation. You will be alone in a galaxy that does not favor the weak." Chen met Vraxt's gaze without flinching. "Then we'll adapt." Dr. Webb stood, joining Chen at the podium. "If I may address the Council," he said, his academic tone contrasting with Chen's military bearing. "We've studied the histories of species that joined the Council. Every single one surrendered aspects of their culture, their technology development, their independence. Most became so dependent on council systems that they couldn't function without them. That is integration, Counselor Vrax said. Unity requires compromise. It requires submission, Webb corrected. The Thurian Collective controls 80% of Council military forces. The Borillian Empire holds the majority of trade routes. Between you, you dictate policy for 300 species. This isn't a council. It's an empire with better marketing. The chamber exploded again, this time with outrage. Representatives shouted, some in their native languages that the translation matrix couldn't process. Krell watched as guards moved toward the human delegation, their posture alert but not yet hostile. Vrax raised one crystalline appendage, and the chamber fell silent. You speak with the arrogance of the ignorant Dr. Webb. The Council has maintained peace for 4,000 years. We have eliminated famine, disease, and territorial conflict across civilized space. What has humanity achieved? A few hundred years of stumbling through space, fighting among yourselves, barely surviving. We've survived, Chen interjected. On our own terms, without anyone's permission or protection. Survival is not success, Thane rumbled. His voice carried the authority of a species that had dominated their corner of the galaxy for millennia before joining the Council. The Borillian Empire once believed as you do. We thought strength meant independence. We learned otherwise when the Kresh nearly drove us to extinction. Only Council intervention saved us. And now you serve them, Chen observed. The statement hung in the air like a challenge. Thane's multiple eyes focused on the human admiral, and for a moment, tension crackled through the chamber. Then, surprisingly, Thane laughed. The sound was like grinding stone, but unmistakably amusement. You have courage, Admiral, foolish courage, but courage nonetheless. Thane settled back into his seat. Very well, reject our offer. Face the galaxy alone. We will see how long human pride sustains you when the first crisis arrives. Vrax seemed less amused. The Council extends its invitation only once. If you refuse today, humanity will not receive another opportunity. You will be classified as an independent polity, subject to all the hazards and restrictions that status entails. We understand, Chen said. Do you truly? Vrax's form pulsed with an emotion the Matrix translated as contempt. Without Council membership, humanity has no legal recourse against corporate resource extraction. Kresh raiders can attack your colonies without triggering defense pacts. You cannot access Council markets, Council technology, or Council protection. Your 14 colony worlds will be isolated dots in unclaimed space, tempting targets for anyone strong enough to take them. Dr. Webb tapped his datapad, and a holographic display appeared above the podium. It showed Earth's colonial holdings, 14 worlds scattered across 2 sectors of space. To any Council member, they looked pathetically vulnerable. Small populations, limited defenses, primitive infrastructure by galactic standards. We've prepared for these possibilities, Webb said. Earth's industrial capacity has tripled in the last decade. Our colonial populations are self-sufficient in food and basic resources. Our military technology may be primitive by your standards, but it's ours. We understand it, we can maintain it, and we can improve it without asking permission. Technology advances slowly without guidance, Counselor Vrax said. You will lag further and further behind while Council species leap forward. In a century, the gap will be insurmountable. Maybe, Chen acknowledged. Or maybe we'll find our own path. Human history is full of moments when we succeeded precisely because we didn't follow the conventional approach. Krell wanted to scream. He'd spent 5 years working toward Council membership, convincing skeptics on Earth that integration was humanity's only viable future. Now Chen and Webb were throwing it all away based on what? Pride. Some misguided belief in human exceptionalism. Around the chamber, representatives were already losing interest. This had been entertaining for a moment, but humanity's rejection was ultimately meaningless to most species. One primitive species choosing to remain primitive wasn't worth extended debate. Several representatives had already returned to their own conversations, discussing matters of actual importance. Only Vrax seemed personally offended by humanity's choice. Her crystalline form had turned a dark amber color, and her voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. You understand that this decision cannot be reversed. Once you leave this chamber, humanity will be on its own. The Council will not intervene in your affairs, will not protect you from consequences, will not offer assistance when you inevitably realize your error. We're counting on it, Chen said quietly. The statement seemed to catch Vraxt off guard. Explain. You've governed 300 species for 4,000 years, Chen said. You've created a galaxy where everyone follows the same rules, uses the same technology, thinks the same way. It's stable. It's peaceful. It's also stagnant. When was the last time a council species developed something revolutionary? When did any member civilization fundamentally change how they approached a problem? We have innovation, Vraxt protested. Council research institutes produce incremental improvements on existing technology, Webb interrupted. Refinements, optimizations, nothing revolutionary because revolution is dangerous and the Council prizes stability above all else. Thane leaned forward. Stability has value human. 4,000 years without major warfare is no small achievement. No, it's not, Chen agreed. But humanity isn't interested in becoming another spoke in your wheel. We'll face the dangers, accept the costs, and forge our own path. Maybe we'll fail. Maybe the Kresh will destroy us, or corporate interests will exploit our resources, or we'll simply prove unable to compete. But if we succeed, we'll do it as humans, not as junior partners in someone else's empire. The chamber was quiet now. Even the disinterested representatives had tuned back in, sensing that something significant was happening. This wasn't just a primitive species rejecting an offer. This was a direct challenge to the entire council system. Vraxt's form cycled through several colors before settling on a deep purple. You will regret this decision, Admiral Chen. Humanity is not as special as you believe. You are one species among millions, and your brief existence gives you no unique insight into survival. The Council has seen species like yours before. Proud, independent, certain of their own superiority. They all failed. They all either joined the Council or disappeared from history. Then will be interesting to watch, Chen said, one way or another. The Admiral gestured to the human delegation. As one, they rose and began filing out of the chamber. Krell found himself swept along with them, still processing what had just happened. Earth had rejected the Council. They'd actually done it. As they passed through the massive doors, Krell heard Vraxt's final words echoing through the chamber. This session is concluded. Let the record show that humanity was offered council membership and declined. They are hereby classified as an independent polity with all associated restrictions. This council wishes them fortune in their chosen isolation. The doors sealed behind them, and the human delegation found themselves in the reception corridor. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then someone started laughing. It was Chen, her composed military bearing finally cracking to reveal genuine amusement. We actually did it, she said. We looked the most powerful organization in the galaxy in their collective face and said no. We signed our death warrant, Krell said bitterly. Do you realize what you've done? The Council wasn't bluffing. Without their protection, we're exposed. Without their technology, we're obsolete. Without their trade networks, we're isolated. Dr. Webb put a hand on Krell's shoulder. We know. The entire delegation knew before we arrived. Earth's governments voted Krell. This wasn't Admiral Chen going rogue. This was humanity making a conscious choice. A suicidal choice. Maybe, Chen said, her laughter fatting. But it's our choice that matters more than safety. They walked through the council station toward the docking area where their ship waited. Around them, representatives from other species watched with expressions ranging from pity to contempt to curiosity. Humanity had just become the galaxy's most interesting oddity or its next cautionary tale. Time would tell which. Back in the council chamber, Vraxt watched the humans depart through remote sensors. Thane moved to stand beside her holographic projection. They will fail, Vraxt said. Their pride will cost them everything. Perhaps, Thane rumbled. But did you see their eyes? They were not afraid. Every species we've integrated came to us out of fear. Fear of enemies, fear of stagnation, fear of being left behind. The humans had none of that. They will learn fear, Vraxt predicted. The galaxy is an excellent teacher. On the human ship, Admiral Chen stood on the bridge, watching the council station recede. Beside her, Dr. Webb reviewed casualty projections, resource requirements, and dozens of other factors that would determine humanity's survival over the coming decades. Are we making a terrible mistake? Webb asked quietly. Chen was silent for a long moment. Probably, but it's our mistake to make. That's worth something. The ship engaged its drives, leaving the council station behind. Ahead lay human space, 14 colony worlds and one home planet standing alone against a galaxy that had just classified them as irrelevant. The odds weren't good. The dangers were real. But humanity had made its choice, and now they would live or die by it. In the council chamber, business continued. Representatives debated trade agreements, mediated disputes, and managed the mundane business of governing 300 species. Humanity's rejection was already fatting into historical footnote status, just another minor event in the Council's 4,000-year history. Only a few beings in the chamber recognized what had really happened today. The Council had assumed humanity would follow the pattern of every other species. Submit or perish, integrate or be destroyed. The fact that humans had chosen a third option, choosing potential destruction over certain submission, hadn't even been considered possible. It was the Council's first mistake regarding humanity. It would not be their last. The mining colony on Threshold 7 wasn't much to look at. 300 prefabricated habitats scattered across a rocky plateau, surrounded by extraction facilities that pulled rare metals from the planet's crust. Colonel James Morrison stood at the command center's observation window, watching the last transport ship disappear into the morning sky. It carried the final group of civilian families being evacuated to the inner colonies. Threshold 7 was humanity's furthest outpost, sitting on the edge of claimed human space. It was also the most likely target for anyone wanting to test Earth's resolve after the Council rejection. Morrison had been stationed here for 6 months, and he'd spent every day preparing for the attack he knew would eventually come. "Colonel, we've got contact," Lieutenant Sarah Park said from the sensor station. "Multiple signatures dropping out of FTL at the system's edge." Morrison moved to the tactical display. 12 red markers appeared on the screen, their transponders identifying them as Kresh Dominion raiders. The Kresh were the galaxy's primary pirate faction, tolerated by the Council because they mostly preyed on independent systems and fringe worlds, exactly like Threshold 7. "Configuration?" Morrison asked. "Standard Kresh raid composition. 4 corvettes, 6 gunships, 2 cargo vessels. They're moving into system at .4 light speed." Park pulled up detailed scans. Energy signatures match known Kresh weapon systems: plasma cannons, missile batteries, boarding torpedoes. Morrison studied the display. The Kresh weren't sophisticated warriors, but they were experienced raiders. They'd hit hundreds of independent colonies over the centuries, overwhelming local defenses through superior numbers and technology before stripping everything of value. Against most targets, their tactics worked perfectly. Time to engagement range: 40 minutes at current speed. They're broadcasting on standard frequencies, demanding our surrender. "Let me hear it." A harsh voice crackled through the speakers, the translation matrix rendering the Kresh language into English. "Human colony, this is Raid Master Krevix of the Dominion. Your council protection has been revoked. You are now viable salvage. Surrender your facilities and resources, and your population will be allowed to evacuate. Resist, and we will take everything by force, including your people. You have 30 minutes to comply." Morrison smiled grimly. "Open a channel." "Channel open, sir." "Raid Master Krevix, this is Colonel James Morrison, commanding Threshold 7 Defense Forces. Your demand is denied. I suggest you turn around and find an easier target." There was a pause, then harsh laughter echoed through the speakers. "You are 12 light hours from the nearest human military base, Colonel. Your colony has no warships, no orbital defense platforms, and no council protection. What exactly will you defend with? Mining equipment and determination." "Something like that," Morrison said. "Park, cut transmission, alert all defense stations, implement Defense Protocol 7. Throughout the colony, alarms began to sound. The remaining personnel, all military or essential civilian contractors who'd volunteered to stay, moved to their assigned positions. Morrison watched them on the internal monitors, noting their efficiency. They drilled this scenario 100 times. The Kresh fleet continued its approach, confident in their overwhelming advantage. Their sensors would show exactly what they expected: a mining colony with minimal defenses, standard commercial sensor arrays, and no military vessels. What their sensors wouldn't show was the truth about Threshold 7's last 6 months of preparation. "Confirm all batteries are in standby mode," Morrison ordered. "Don't even think about charging capacitors until I give the word. I want them close." "That's a risk, sir," Park observed. "If they realize what we've got before we're ready." "They won't. They're looking at a mining colony, so that's all they'll see." Morrison pulled up the tactical overlay showing Threshold 7's hidden defenses. Admiral Chen said the Council and everyone else thinks we're primitives with kinetic weapons and fusion drives. Let's not disappoint them. The Kresh fleet closed to 20 light seconds, well within effective weapons range for their plasma cannons. On the display, Morrison watched as they began spreading into attack formation. Textbook raider tactics. Corvettes in front to absorb any defensive fire, gunships flanking to suppress ground installations, cargo vessels hanging back to collect salvage. "They're charging weapons," Park reported, "targeting our sensor arrays and power generation facilities." "Let them shoot first. I want this absolutely clear for the record." The first plasma bolts lanced through space, crossing 20 light seconds in an eye blink. They struck Threshold 7's commercial sensor array, reducing it to molten slag. The power plant took 2 hits. Its fusion reactor scrammed automatically. To the Kresh sensors, the colony had just been blinded and crippled. "Now," Park asked. "Not yet, wait for it." The Kresh fleet advanced, moving to within 10 light seconds. Morrison could imagine the conversation happening on their command ships. Easy target, minimal resistance, probably won't even need the boarding torpedoes. "Boarding craft launching from the corvettes," Park announced. 6 torpedoes inbound. They're planning to take the colony intact. Morrison waited until the boarding torpedoes crossed the 5 light second mark. Then he smiled. "Defense Protocol 7, execute now." What happened next took 8 seconds and changed the Kresh Dominion's understanding of human military capability. The mining facilities that dotted Threshold 7's surface weren't all for mining. 16 of them were actually disguised weapon emplacements, housing railgun batteries that had been designed specifically for orbital defense. Each battery contained 6 railguns, and each railgun could fire a tungsten penetrator at 3% of light speed. 96 railguns opened fire simultaneously. The boarding torpedoes never had a chance. Traveling at relatively slow speeds to preserve boarding parties, they were stationary targets by railgun standards. Each torpedo took multiple hits, their armor and shields meaningless against kinetic projectiles moving at a significant fraction of light speed. 6 expanding debris clouds marked where the boarding craft had been. But the railguns didn't stop firing. The Kresh gunships, positioned closest to the planet for ground suppression, found themselves in a lethal crossfire. Tungsten penetrators ripped through their hulls at velocities that made shields nearly useless. 2 gunships exploded immediately, their reactors breached. 3 more tumbled, atmosphere venting, power systems failing. The last gunship managed to turn and boost away, trailing debris. "Kresh fleet is breaking formation," Park said, her voice carrying an edge of excitement. "Corvettes are trying to close, but they're taking evasive action. They didn't expect this." Morrison watched the tactical display. The Kresh had numerical superiority and better technology in most areas, but they'd walked into a trap assuming an easy victory. Now they were discovering that human, primitive, weapons could kill just as effectively as Council plasma cannons. "Target the corvettes. I want continuous fire on their approach vectors. Make them choose between advancing and survival." The railgun batteries swiveled, tracking the Kresh corvettes. At ranges under 5 light seconds, the projectiles were essentially hit-scan weapons. The Kresh ships tried to dodge, their superior engines allowing for rapid course changes, but the sheer volume of fire made evasion difficult. One corvette took a penetrator through its primary thruster array and spun helplessly. Another lost its forward shields and pulled back, unwilling to risk further damage. "They're trying to establish firing solutions for orbital bombardment," Park warned. "If they get far enough out, they can hit us from beyond effective railgun range." "Then we don't let them get far enough out. Activate the satellites." 3 months ago, Threshold 7 had launched what appeared to be a new communications satellite network. 16 small satellites, positioned in various orbits, ostensibly to improve colony communications. In reality, each satellite was a weapons platform carrying a single fusion missile and basic maneuvering thrusters. The satellites activated, burning their limited fuel to intercept the retreating Kresh corvettes. The Kresh sensors detected them too late. Their weapons were oriented toward the planet, preparing for bombardment. They weren't watching for threats from their flanks and rear. 16 fusion warheads detonated in the void. 4 corvettes were caught in the overlapping blast radius. They hadn't expected nuclear weapons. The Council had banned fusion warheads 2,000 years ago as unnecessarily destructive. Most civilized species had forgotten they even existed. Humanity had not forgotten. When the radiation cleared, 2 corvettes were gone, atomized by direct hits. One was crippled, its hull breached in a dozen places. The 4th had survived with moderate damage but was already turning away, its captain deciding that retreat was the better part of valor. Remaining Kresh vessels are withdrawing, Park reported. They're broadcasting distress calls and... Wait, they're specifically calling for Council intervention. They're claiming we used illegal weapons. Morrison allowed himself a thin smile. Tell them the Council doesn't intervene in conflicts involving independent polities. They made that very clear when humanity rejected membership. The surviving Kresh ships jumped to FTL, leaving behind debris fields and a confused understanding of human military capabilities. Morrison watched them go, then turned to address his command staff. Damage report. Sensor array destroyed, but we've got backups coming online. Power plant is intact, just scrammed for safety. Railgun batteries are at 80% capacity, but we're overheating on emplacements 6, 12, and 14. No casualties. We won, sir. Morrison nodded slowly. They'd won this battle, but the war had just begun. The Kresh would report back to the Dominion, and the Dominion would pass information to other factions. Humanity's military capabilities were no longer theoretical. They'd just proven they could hurt someone who attacked them. Get me a secure link to Fleet Command, Morrison ordered. Admiral Chen needs to know the Kresh took the bait. While his crew worked, Morrison returned to the observation window. In the distance, debris from destroyed Kresh vessels burned in orbit, creating temporary shooting stars against the planet's atmosphere. The attack had gone exactly as planned, almost too perfectly. That bothered him. The Kresh weren't stupid. They'd survived as raiders for centuries by picking their targets carefully. Yet they'd hit threshold 7 barely 3 months after humanity's Council rejection, with a force that was large enough to be threatening but not large enough to guarantee victory against an unknown opponent. Someone had sent them. Someone wanted to test human defenses. Someone wanted to see how humanity would respond without Council protection. The question was who and why. Across the galaxy, news of the Threshold 7 battle spread through unofficial channels. The Kresh Dominion tried to suppress the information, embarrassed by their defeat, but pirates talked. Stories leaked. Within days, every major faction knew that humanity had bloodied the Dominion's nose using primitive kinetic weapons and banned fusion warheads. Reactions varied. Some species laughed, amused that the upstart humans had actually managed to defend themselves. Others worried, concerned about what other surprises humanity might have hidden. A few began quietly revising their estimates of human military capability. In the council chamber, Councillor Vraxt received the report with cold fury. Thane, sitting beside her, seemed almost amused. They defended themselves, Thane observed. Effectively, I might add, the Kresh lost 7 ships to a mining colony. That's impressive for a species we classified as primitive. They used nuclear weapons, Vrax said. Weapons banned by Council Accord for 2 millennia. This cannot be tolerated. They're not Council members, Thane reminded her. Our accords don't apply to them. We made that very clear when they rejected membership. Vrax's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. They're dangerous, unpredictable. They refuse to follow civilized norms. No, they refuse to follow our norms. There's a difference. Thane leaned back in his seat. The humans are doing exactly what they said they would, finding their own path. We shouldn't be surprised when that path doesn't match ours. And when their path threatens galactic stability. Does it? They defended their colony from pirates. That's hardly destabilizing. If anything, they did us a favor. The Kresh have been getting bold lately. A reminder that even primitive species can bite back might make them more cautious. Vrax turned to face Thane directly. You're defending them. I'm observing them, Thane corrected. With interest. The Borillian Empire remembers what it was like to stand alone, to fight for survival without anyone's permission or protection. We eventually chose to join the Council, but we remember that time. The humans remind me of who we once were. And you admire them for it. I'm curious about them. There's a difference. Vrax dismissed the conversation with a wave of one crystalline appendage. It doesn't matter. They cannot sustain this independence. One victory against a raider fleet proves nothing. They have 14 colonies, all vulnerable, all exposed. They cannot defend everything. Eventually, they'll face a threat they cannot overcome, and then they'll come begging for council protection. Perhaps, Thane said, or perhaps they'll surprise us again. On Earth, Admiral Chen stood in the war room, reviewing reports from Threshold 7 with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The battle had gone well, but it was only the beginning. The galaxy now knew humanity would fight, but they didn't yet understand how far humanity was willing to go. The Kresh will be back, General Park said. He was the lieutenant's father and one of Earth's senior military strategists. They can't let this stand. It makes them look weak. Good, Chen said. Let them come again. We need more data on their tactics, their technology, their responses to our weapons. You're using our colonies as bait. I'm using our colonies as laboratories. Every engagement teaches us something about how the galaxy fights. The councils had 4,000 years to refine their military doctrine. We've had less than a century in space. We can't match them in technology or numbers, so we have to be smarter, faster, more adaptable. Dr. Webb entered the war room, carrying a data tablet. Interesting news from our intelligence network. 3 separate corporate entities have made inquiries about purchasing resource rights to our colony systems. Another 5 have asked about technology exchanges. Translation, Chen asked. They want to see if we're open to exploitation. They're testing whether we'll sell ourselves piecemeal since we rejected the Council's bulk offer. Webb set down the tablet. There's also been an uptick in survey missions near our space. Nothing overt, but definitely reconnaissance. They're circling like sharks smelling blood, General Park observed. Or like businessmen smelling opportunity, Webb countered. Not everyone in the galaxy is hostile to us. Some species might see independent humanity as a useful counterweight to Council dominance. Chen studied the star map on the war room's main display. 14 human colonies, scattered across 2 sectors, each one a potential target or a potential testing ground. Beyond their borders, thousands of species watched and waited to see if humanity would survive or become another cautionary tale. We need to change the narrative, Chen said. Right now, we're the primitive species that got lucky against some pirates. We need to be more than that. What did you have in mind? Chen smiled, the expression carrying no warmth. We need to remind the galaxy that humanity didn't get to the top of Earth's food chain by playing defense. It's time to start taking some initiative. That's dangerously vague. It's intentionally vague, because if I tell you the specific plans, you'll try to talk me out of them. Chen turned from the display. The Council thinks we'll collapse under pressure. The Kresh think we're easy targets with one good trick. Everyone expects us to react, to respond, to play defense until we're overwhelmed. Nobody expects us to attack. Attack who? General Park asked carefully. We can't win a war against the Council or any major faction. We don't need to win a war. We just need to prove we're not prey. Chen pulled up a new section of the star map, showing unclaimed systems near human space. There are resources out there, territory nobody's claimed because it's too far from Council protection or too dangerous to develop. We're going to claim it. That will be seen as aggression. By whom? It's unclaimed space. And if anyone objects, they're admitting they wanted it themselves but were too cautious to take it. Either way, we win. We either get the territory or we expose Council hypocrisy about independent development. Webb whistled quietly. That's actually clever, dangerous, potentially catastrophic, but clever. That's humanity's speciality, Chen said. Dangerous, potentially catastrophic, and clever. The galaxy wanted to see what we do without Council protection. Let's show them. Back on Threshold 7, Colonel Morrison watched the cleanup operations and thought about the future. They'd won today, but he'd been a soldier long enough to know that first victories were often the most dangerous. They bred confidence that could turn into overconfidence. They made you think you understood the enemy when you'd only seen one facet of their capabilities. The Kresh would come back better prepared and more cautious. Other threats would emerge. And eventually, humanity would face something they couldn't defeat with clever tactics and hidden weapons. What would they do then? Morrison didn't know, but he suspected Admiral Chen had some ideas. And that thought was somehow both comforting and terrifying in equal measure. The Kepler Belt had been considered worthless for 300 years. Situated between Council space and the lawless frontier territories, the asteroid field contained valuable minerals, but was plagued by radiation storms, unstable gravitational fields, and occasional incursions by Kresh raiders. Every species that had surveyed it concluded that extraction costs would exceed any potential profits. The Council's official position was that the Kepler belt would remain undeveloped until someone invented technology to make it economically viable. Captain Maria Rodriguez brought her ship, the Pathfinder, into the belt 6 months after the Threshold 7 incident. Behind her, 15 industrial vessels carried the equipment and personnel to establish humanity's first deep space mining operation. The mission was a calculated risk. If they succeeded, humanity would gain access to resources that could sustain their independence for decades. If they failed, they'd lose ships, personnel, and credibility. Radiation levels are higher than projections, her science officer reported. We're seeing periodic spikes that could damage unshielded equipment. Then we'll shield the equipment, Rodriguez said. What about the asteroids themselves? Scans confirm mineral deposits match the original surveys. Platinum, iridium, rare earth elements. Enough to make this very profitable if we can extract it. Rodriguez studied the sensor displays. The Kepler belt stretched before them like a field of glittering diamonds, each asteroid a potential treasure or a potential hazard. Council species had looked at this and seen an unprofitable headache. Rodriguez saw opportunity. Deploy the survey drones. I want complete scans of the largest asteroids within 12 hours. Engineering, start setting up the radiation shelters. Operations, begin positioning the extraction platforms. Her crew moved with practiced efficiency. 6 months ago, most of them had been civilians. Engineers, miners, scientists drawn from Earth's colonies with promises of adventure and good pay. Now they were spacers, comfortable in zero gravity, confident in their abilities, ready to claim territory that no one else wanted. The mission wasn't secret. Rodriguez had filed claim notifications with every major navigation database in the sector. Any species that checked their records would know humans were developing the Kepler belt. She was counting on most species not caring enough to check. She was wrong. 3 days into the operation, a Council patrol ship dropped out of FTL at the belt's edge. Rodriguez watched it on sensors, noting its Thurian design and heavy armament. It wasn't a military vessel exactly, but Council patrols were equipped to handle pirate encounters, more than enough to cause problems for unarmed industrial ships. They're broadcasting on standard frequencies, her communications officer said, demanding identification and purpose. Give them exactly what they ask for, nothing more, nothing less. The response went out, identifying the Pathfinder and its mission. There was a pause, then the Council ship began moving closer, matching velocity with the human vessels. They want to speak with you directly, Captain. Command-level communication. Rodriguez straightened her uniform and activated the holographic communicator. A Thurian officer appeared, their crystalline form much like Counselor Vraxt but smaller and younger. The translation matrix rendered their voice as clipped and formal. Captain Rodriguez, I am Commander Zakes of the Council Patrol Service. You are operating in unclaimed space adjacent to Council-protected lanes. Explain your intentions. Commander, we're establishing a mining operation in the Kepler belt. All appropriate claims have been filed with navigation databases. We're following standard protocols for development of unclaimed territory. Zakes' form flickered, a sign of agitation. The Kepler belt has been classified as undevelopable by Council survey. Your presence here is irregular. The Council classified it as undevelopable for Council members. We're not Council members. Different economic calculations apply. This territory borders Council space. Development here requires Council oversight to ensure no threat to established lanes or territories. Rodriguez kept her expression neutral, but internally she was smiling. This was exactly the response Admiral Chen had predicted. The Council couldn't tolerate independent development near their space, but they also couldn't legally stop it without admitting they controlled unclaimed territory. Commander, with respect, this is unclaimed space. If the Council wanted oversight authority, they should have claimed it themselves. We're happy to coordinate our traffic with Council lanes to avoid interference, but we're not requesting permission for our operations. Zakes' form turned a darker shade. You are aware that operating without Council certification means your vessels will not be protected by patrol routes. If you encounter pirates or other threats, we have no obligation to intervene. We're aware we'll handle our own security. With what? Your vessels are unarmed industrial craft. The Kresh raid through this sector regularly. Then I guess we better work fast. Rodriguez gestured to her tactical officer, who transmitted a data packet to the Council ship. We've prepared a traffic coordination plan to ensure our operations don't interfere with Council shipping. You'll find we're quite serious about staying out of your way. Zakes examined the data for a long moment. The traffic plan was thorough, professional, and completely legal under galactic conventions. It gave the Council no legitimate grounds for objection while firmly establishing humanity's right to operate in the belt. This is highly irregular, Zakes finally said. I'm forwarding this situation to my superiors. Until we receive guidance, this patrol ship will remain in the area to monitor your operations. You're welcome to observe, Commander. We have nothing to hide. The communication ended. Rodriguez let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her tactical officer looked up from his console with a slight smile. They're positioning themselves 5,000 kilometers from our operations. Close enough to watch, far enough to claim they're not interfering. Bet they're already sending detailed reports back to Council Command. That's exactly what we want them to do, Rodriguez said. Let them watch us work. Let them see that humans can operate in conditions they deemed impossible. Every report they send back chips away at their narrative about our primitive capabilities. The mining operation continued under Council observation. Rodriguez's crews worked in brutal conditions, dealing with radiation, unstable gravity fields, and the constant threat of asteroid collisions. Equipment failed. Personnel got injured. Twice they had to evacuate platforms when radiation storms exceeded safe limits. But they kept working. Slowly, methodically, they proved that what the Council said was impossible could actually be done with enough determination and willingness to accept risk. 2 weeks into the operation, the Kresh arrived. 3 raider ships, smaller than the force that had hit Threshold 7, but more than enough to threaten undefended industrial vessels. They dropped out of FTL on the belt's far side, probably assuming they could hit the human operation and escape before the Council patrol could respond. Rodriguez watched them on sensors and smiled. Operations, recall all personnel to defended positions. Weapons crews, you're clear to engage once they're in range. Her tactical officer looked confused. Captain, we filed these vessels as unarmed industrial craft. We filed them as industrial craft. We never said they were unarmed. The industrial vessels maneuvering in the belt had been designed with dual purposes. On the surface, they were mining and processing equipment. Hidden inside their industrial frameworks were weapon systems, not as powerful as dedicated warships, but sufficient for self-defense. And unlike at Threshold 7, Rodriguez wasn't interested in letting the enemy shoot first. As the Kresh ships closed to weapons range, 10 of the industrial vessels suddenly lit up with active targeting systems. Railgun turrets extended from concealed mounting points. Missile batteries unlocked and trained on the approaching raiders. The Kresh ships tried to evade, but they'd already committed to their attack run. The industrial vessels, apparently clumsy and slow, suddenly moved with coordinated precision. They'd been practicing these maneuvers for weeks, pretending to be awkward mining platforms while actually rehearsing combat formations. Rodriguez didn't wait for the Kresh to get organized. All batteries, open fire. The first volley caught the Kresh completely off guard. Railgun projectiles, slower than Threshold 7's planetary batteries but still devastatingly effective in space combat, hammered into the lead raider. Its shields buckled and failed. The second volley punched through its hull, venting atmosphere and spinning the ship out of control. The remaining Kresh ships tried to scatter, but they were boxed in by asteroids and incoming fire. One managed to return fire, its plasma cannons destroying an industrial vessel that had been too slow to reach cover. The crew evacuated in escape pods just before the ship exploded. Target the one heading for the Council patrol, Rodriguez ordered. Let's see if we can drive them right into Zakes' lap. Her weapons crews adjusted their fire, herding the Kresh ship toward the Council vessel. Commander Zakes apparently decided that having an armed raider bearing down on them was sufficient threat to justify action. The Council patrol ship opened fire with professional precision, crippling the Kresh vessel in 3 shots. The last Kresh raider decided retreat was the better option and jumped to FTL, trailing debris and emergency beacons. Rodriguez let them go. One survivor to spread the word was more valuable than one more wreck in the belt. "Cease fire," she ordered. "Damage reports." One vessel destroyed, crew recovered. Two more damaged but salvageable. Total casualties, 3 injured, none critical. We bloodied them good, Captain. Rodriguez allowed herself a moment of satisfaction before opening a channel to the Council patrol. "Commander Zakes, thank you for your assistance with that last raider. We appreciate the support." Zakes's form was a confused swirl of colors. "Your industrial vessels are armed. This was not disclosed in your filing." "Commander, we're operating in dangerous space without Council protection. Of course we're armed. It would be foolish not to be. Our filings identified these as industrial vessels, which they are. We never claimed they were defenseless." "This is deceptive." "This is prudent. You yourself warned us that the Kresh raid this sector regularly. We took your warning seriously and prepared accordingly." Rodriguez kept her tone professional and reasonable. "If the Council would prefer to extend their protection to human operations in unclaimed space, we'd be happy to discuss that option. Otherwise, we'll continue providing our own security." The communication ended abruptly. Rodriguez suspected Zakes was sending increasingly frantic reports back to Council Command, trying to figure out how to classify this situation. Human vessels that were simultaneously industrial platforms and warships. Operating in space, the Council claimed was too dangerous, while defending themselves from threats the Council said they couldn't handle. Every assumption about human limitations was being systematically proven wrong, and the Council was being forced to watch it happen in real time. Across human space, similar operations were unfolding. While the Kepler Belt operation drew the most attention, smaller missions were claiming asteroid fields, establishing waypoints, and surveying systems that Council species had deemed not worth the effort. Humanity was expanding, not by conquering territory from other species, but by occupying spaces everyone else had abandoned or ignored. It was aggressive in its scope, but technically peaceful. They weren't attacking anyone. They weren't violating treaties. They were simply being everywhere the Council wasn't, filling gaps in the galactic map with human presence and human claims. In the Council chamber, Councillor Vraxt reviewed reports with mounting frustration. Humanity had been independent for less than a year, yet they'd established operations in a dozen previously unclaimed systems. Their colonies were growing, their industrial base expanding, their military capabilities proving far more robust than initial assessments suggested. "They're like weeds," she said to Thane. "Cut them down in one place, they sprout up in 3 others. They have 14 colony worlds, but they're acting like they have 100. Thane studied the reports with what might have been admiration. They're maximizing their presence with minimal resources. Classic expansion strategy for a species that knows it's outnumbered. Occupy as much space as possible, make yourself too dispersed to easily attack, force potential enemies to commit significant resources to target you. They're overextending themselves. They cannot possibly defend all these operations." "Can't they? They've defended everything so far, and each successful defense makes the next attack less likely. Who wants to be the 3rd or 4th faction to lose ships to primitive human weapons?" Vraxt pulsed with agitation. "This cannot continue. They're disrupting established patterns, creating instability. Other independent species are starting to ask why they need Council membership if humans can thrive without it." "That seems like a question worth answering," Thane observed. "You're not taking this seriously." "I'm taking it very seriously. I'm just not sure we should be treating it as a problem. The humans aren't attacking anyone. They're not violating any laws or treaties. They're simply refusing to operate by Council assumptions about what's possible or profitable. They're using nuclear weapons. In self-defense against pirates, unless you want to argue that the Kresh Dominion deserves Council protection." Thane's multiple eyes focused on Vraxt. "The humans are doing what every species does, pursuing their interests and ensuring their survival. The fact that they're doing it without our permission bothers you, but that's not actually a legitimate grievance." Vraxt was silent for a long moment. "They will fail eventually. They must. No species can sustain this level of expansion without Council infrastructure. Perhaps, or perhaps they'll succeed and prove that Council membership is a choice, not a necessity. That would be interesting, wouldn't it?" Back in the Kepler Belt, Captain Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the Pathfinder, watching her crew's work. The mining operation was ahead of schedule despite the Kresh attack. The Council patrol was still watching, but now from a respectful distance. And every day they were pulling resources out of space that the Council had written off as worthless. "Captain, message from Fleet Command," her communications officer reported. "They're sending 3 cargo vessels to collect the first shipment, ETA 48 hours. Rodriguez nodded. The first shipment would be mostly symbolic, proof that human operations in the belt were viable. But subsequent shipments would be substantial. Enough raw materials to supply Earth shipyards for months, with more coming as operations expanded. Acknowledge the message. Tell them we'll have the cargo ready." She thought about Admiral Chen's strategy, the grand plan that had driven humanity's expansion. Occupy the margins. Prove you can survive without permission. Force the galaxy to acknowledge human capability by demonstrating it repeatedly in situations where everyone expected failure. It was working, slowly, carefully, often at significant cost, but it was working. Humanity was carving out a place in the galaxy not by asking for it, but by taking it wherever space lay empty and unclaimed. The Council couldn't stop them without admitting they controlled unclaimed space, which would undermine their authority with other independent species. Couldn't ignore them because human operations were too visible, too successful, too disruptive to established patterns. Couldn't co-opt them because humanity had already rejected Council membership. It was a trap, and the Council had walked into it assuming humans would fail quickly enough that the trap wouldn't matter. Now they were stuck watching humanity succeed, unable to intervene without exposing their own hypocrisy. Rodriguez smiled at the asteroid field stretching before her. Somewhere out there, other human crews were establishing other operations, claiming other territories, proving in a dozen different ways that humanity didn't need the Council's permission to thrive. The galaxy had wanted to see what humanity would do without Council protection. They were finding out, one asteroid at a time, one defended colony at a time, one successful operation at a time. And they were beginning to realize that humanity's rejection of Council membership might not have been arrogance or foolishness. It might have been confidence based on accurate self-assessment. Humans knew exactly what they were capable of when properly motivated, and the Council's assumptions about primitive species were proving dangerously inaccurate. The question now wasn't whether humanity could survive independently. The question was what they would do next, and how the galaxy would respond when they did it. The conference room on Earth's orbital station held representatives from 17 independent species. Not one of them was a Council member. Ambassador Krell watched them file in with a mixture of hope and trepidation. 2 years ago, he'd been convinced that humanity's rejection of Council membership was suicide. Now he was helping organize the first independent species summit in 300 years. The species represented here were diverse. The Vax, an insected race from the galactic rim who'd maintained independence through isolation. The Sorny, aquatic beings whose homeworld's unique chemistry made Council technology incompatible with their biology. The Drechen, a warrior culture that had fought the Council to a standstill centuries ago and won the right to autonomy through sheer bloody-minded persistence. And a dozen others, all species that had found reasons to stay outside the Council's embrace. Some were too remote, some too proud, some simply too different to integrate easily. What they all shared was a wariness of humanity's invitation and curiosity about what this summit might accomplish. Admiral Chen entered the room and conversations died. She'd become something of a legend in the 2 years since Threshold 7, the human who'd told the Council no and then proceeded to prove she meant it. Several species respected strength above all else. Chen had demonstrated plenty of that. "Thank you all for coming," Chen began, taking her position at the head of the conference table. "I'll be direct because I think we all appreciate directness. The Council wants every species to join them. They offer protection, technology, and stability in exchange for sovereignty. Some species find that trade acceptable. We don't." She paused, letting that sink in. Around the table, representatives showed various forms of acknowledgement or agreement. But independence has costs. We all know that. You can't access Council markets without heavy tariffs. You can't use Council technology without licensing fees that amount to tribute. You face threats from pirates, corporations, and occasionally from Council member species who decide your territory would be better served under their administration. A Dretchen warrior named Croth growled agreement. His species had lost 3 colony worlds to council-backed corporate takeovers in the last century. Legally executed, technically peaceful, but takeovers nonetheless. Humanity proposes an alternative, Chen continued. Not a new council, not another bureaucracy that will eventually become what we're trying to avoid, just a network. A mutual defense pact, a trade consortium, and an information exchange. Independent species helping each other stay independent. The council will see this as a threat, said Silene, the Sorny representative. Her voice came through an aquatic translator that made her words sound liquid and flowing. They tolerate individual independence because it's inefficient to suppress, but organized independence, that threatens their entire model. Good, Chen said flatly. Let them worry. They've had 4,000 years of assuming everyone will eventually join them or fade into irrelevance. Time someone challenged that assumption. Dr. Webb stepped forward, activating a holographic display. We've prepared a framework. No species surrenders sovereignty. No centralized government. Each member maintains complete autonomy over their internal affairs. What we share is defense coordination, trade agreements, and technology exchange. The display showed a network of connections between independent species, trade routes, mutual defense zones, and shared research initiatives. It looked nothing like the Council's hierarchical structure, more like a web with connections between species but no central authority. Who leads this network? Asked a Vax representative, their chittering translated into standard speech. Every organization requires leadership. How do you prevent this from becoming another council with a different name? Rotating administration, Webb explained. Every 6 months, a different species hosts the coordination functions. Strategic decisions require unanimous agreement. Any species can veto any proposal. It's deliberately inefficient because efficiency leads to centralization, and centralization leads to control. There was silence around the table. Several representatives were clearly skeptical. The proposal was radical, almost naive in its idealism. But then again, humanity's entire approach had been considered naive, and they'd made it work so far. Croth leaned forward, his massive form dominating his section of the table. The Dretchen have maintained independence through strength. We need no one's assistance to defend our territory. Why should we bind ourselves to weaker species who might drag us into conflicts not our own? Chen met his gaze without flinching. Because even the strong can be overwhelmed. The Council doesn't fight wars. They don't need to. They isolate independent species, cut off trade, make life difficult enough that joining becomes the path of least resistance. You're strong enough to fight off direct attacks, but can you sustain your civilization if you're completely cut off from galactic commerce? We have managed so far. You've survived so far, there's a difference. Chen pulled up economic data. Your industrial capacity has been stagnant for 50 years. Your technology development has slowed. Not because your people aren't capable, but because you're doing everything alone. You're spending so much energy on survival that you have nothing left for growth. Croth's expression was hard to read, but he didn't immediately object. Chen pressed her advantage. Now imagine if you could trade freely with 17 other species, if you could share technology development costs, if you could focus your military on actual threats instead of maintaining constant defensive postures against hypothetical council aggression. You'd still be independent, still in control of your destiny, just not alone. Silene spoke up again. The Sorny are isolated by our biology. Council technology is toxic to us. How does this network benefit us when we cannot use most species' technology? Webb smiled. Actually, that's one of the advantages. The Council develops one-size-fits-all solutions because they're trying to serve 300 species. We can develop custom solutions for each member's needs. Humanity has chemists and engineers who'd love to work on Sorny-compatible technology, not as charity but as trade. You have resources we need. We have capabilities you need. Everyone benefits. The discussion continued for hours. Questions, objections, concerns about implementation. Some species were genuinely interested. Others were clearly skeptical but willing to listen. A few seemed to be attending mostly to gather intelligence they could sell to the Council. Chen let Webb handle most of the technical questions. She watched the representatives, reading their body language where translation allowed, trying to gauge genuine interest from polite attendants. This summit was a risk. If it failed, humanity would look foolish, trying to organize something they didn't have the credibility to lead. If it succeeded, they'd be painting an even bigger target on their backs. During a break, Krell approached Chen privately. "This is ambitious, maybe too ambitious. The Council has agents here. They'll know everything we discussed within days." "I'm counting on it," Chen said. "Let them know we're organizing. Let them worry about what independent species might accomplish if we work together. The more attention they pay to us, the less attention they pay to their own internal problems." "What internal problems? The Council is stable." "The Council is stagnant. 4,000 years of the same policies, the same power structure, the same two species controlling everything. That doesn't last forever. Eventually, something breaks." Chen watched the various species representatives networking during the break. "We just need to make sure we're ready when it does." The summit concluded with modest success. 5 species agreed to immediate participation in the Mutual Defense Pact. 3 more would join the trade consortium. 2 were interested in technology exchange programs. It wasn't the united front Chen had hoped for, but it was a start. More importantly, it was proof that independent species could organize, could cooperate, could present a unified front when needed. News of the summit spread quickly. The Council's official response was dismissive. Councillor Vraxt issued a statement calling it a temporary alliance of convenience that will dissolve under pressure. But privately, Council intelligence agencies began intensive surveillance of all participating species. The Kresh Dominion saw it differently. 2 months after the summit, they launched their largest raid yet against human space. 20 ships targeting New Vancouver, one of humanity's most developed colonies. They weren't testing defenses this time. They were trying to prove that humanity couldn't protect their own territory, hoping to fracture the newly formed network before it could solidify. They chose the wrong target. New Vancouver had spent 2 years fortifying after Threshold 7. The colony didn't just have hidden weapons. They had a complete defense network, coordinated sensors, and most importantly, backup. 3 Dretchen warships were conducting exercises in a nearby system. A VAX defense platform happened to be resupplying at New Vancouver's orbital station. When the Kresh fleet dropped out of FTL, they expected to face a colonial defense force. Instead, they encountered a coordinated response from 3 species with completely different military doctrines. Human railguns, Dretchen plasma cannons, and VAX kinetic mines created a crossfire that shredded the Kresh formation in the first 30 seconds. The battle was short, brutal, and decisive. The Kresh lost 14 ships. The survivors retreated, broadcasting distress calls that were ignored by the Council patrol 2 systems away. New Vancouver lost 2 defense platforms and took damage to their orbital station, but the colony itself was untouched. More importantly, 3 independent species had successfully coordinated a defense. The Mutual Defense Pact wasn't theoretical anymore. It was operational, effective, and clearly something the Kresh hadn't prepared for. In the council chamber, Councillor Vraxt watched recordings of the battle with barely controlled fury. Beside her, Thane seemed thoughtful rather than concerned. "They're organizing," Vraxt said. "The humans aren't content with their own independence. They're actively recruiting other species to resist Council integration. Or they're forming defensive alliances because they recognize mutual vulnerability," Thane countered. "The Kresh have been raiding independent systems for centuries. The Council tolerates this because it encourages species to join for protection. Now the independent species have found their own solution. A solution that undermines Council authority. A solution that proves Council membership isn't the only viable option. That's different from undermining our authority." Vrax turned to face Thane directly. "You continue to defend them. Why? The Borillian Empire is a Council member. This network of independent species is antithetical to everything we've built." Thane was quiet for a long moment. "The Borillian Empire joined the Council because we faced extinction from the Kresh. We had no choice. We've served faithfully for 2,000 years, contributed our military strength, supported Council policies even when they conflicted with our interests. But sometimes I wonder what we might have accomplished if we'd had an alternative. If there had been a network of independent species, we could have joined instead of submitting to the Council." "You cannot be serious." "I'm being honest. The Council has maintained peace, yes, but at what cost? How much innovation have we suppressed in the name of stability? How many species have lost their unique character because Council integration demands conformity?" "You speak like a revolutionary." I speak like someone who remembers what we were before we joined. The humans remind me of that. They're arrogant, reckless, and often frustratingly successful because they don't know they're supposed to fail. Maybe the galaxy needs that. Vraxt's form cycled through angry colors. I will remember this conversation, Counselor Thane. Your sympathy for these rebels may become relevant when the Council decides how to address this situation. Then I hope I've made my position clear. Thane stood to his full height, towering over Vraxt's crystalline form. The Borillian Empire has served the Council faithfully, but our loyalty has limits. If the Council decides to suppress independent species simply for choosing independence, then perhaps it's time to question whether we're truly the force for good we claim to be. He left the chamber, leaving Vraxt alone with her fury and growing uncertainty. The situation was spiraling beyond her control. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were thriving, expanding, organizing. And now they were inspiring other independent species to resist Council integration. Something had to be done. The question was what and how to do it without proving the humans' point about Council oppression. On Earth, Admiral Chen reviewed reports from New Vancouver with satisfaction. The coordinated defense had worked exactly as planned. More importantly, it had been observed by Council monitors, reported throughout the information networks, and noted by dozens of species considering their own position relative to the Council. 5 more species have contacted us, Dr. Webb reported. They're interested in joining the network. 2 are current Council members asking about the process for withdrawing membership. Chen raised an eyebrow. Council members want to leave, that's new. Apparently, there's growing dissatisfaction with the Thurian-Borillian dominance of Council policy. Some species joined because they had no alternative. Now we're showing them there might be another option. This is escalating faster than I expected. We need to be careful. Push too hard, and the Council will feel threatened enough to take direct action against us. And if we don't push hard enough, we lose momentum. Independent species are watching to see if we're a viable alternative or just a temporary anomaly. Webb set down his datapad. We've opened a door, Admiral. Now we need to decide how wide we want it to swing. Chen looked out at Earth, visible through the station's observation window. 2 years ago, they'd rejected Council membership on a principle. The principle that humanity should determine its own fate, regardless of the risks. Now that principle was spreading, inspiring other species, challenging the fundamental assumptions that had governed the galaxy for 4 millennia. We keep pushing, Chen decided. Carefully but firmly. The Council has had unopposed authority for too long. They've forgotten that authority has to be earned, not just assumed. Time someone reminded them. Across the galaxy, the situation continued to shift. The network of independent species grew slowly but steadily. Trade routes opened between members. Technology exchanges began. Defense coordination improved. It wasn't a rival to the Council's power, not yet. But it was something the Council couldn't ignore. And in quiet conversations on dozens of worlds, species began asking questions they hadn't asked in centuries. Questions about sovereignty, about the price of security, about whether Council membership was truly the only path to survival and prosperity. Humanity had rejected Council diplomacy. Now they were systematically proving that rejection wasn't suicide. It was viable, sustainable, and possibly even superior for species willing to accept the risks of independence. The galaxy was changing. The Council's monopoly on interstellar governance was being challenged not through warfare or revolution, but through the simple demonstration that alternatives existed and could succeed. And nobody was sure what would happen next. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was called without warning. Representatives scrambled to attend, some appearing via hologram because they couldn't reach the chamber in time. The urgency was unprecedented. In 4,000 years of Council history, emergency sessions had been called exactly 7 times, usually for existential threats like the Kresh Wars or the cataclysm of Sector 9. Councillor Vraxt stood at the central podium, her crystalline form pulsing with barely controlled agitation. Around her, 300 species representatives waited to hear what crisis had prompted this gathering. The Council faces an unprecedented challenge, Vraxt began. For 4 millennia, we have maintained galactic stability through unity. We have offered protection, technology, and prosperity to all species willing to join us. In return, we have created a civilization spanning thousands of worlds, free from major conflict, free from the chaos that plagued the ancient galaxy. She paused, and the chamber's lighting focused on a holographic display showing the galaxy's political map. Council space was marked in blue, covering approximately 40% of claimed territory. Scattered throughout were independent systems marked in gray. But now, a new color appeared, green markers indicating the network of independent species humanity had organized. This network threatens everything we have built, Vraxt continued. It presents an alternative to Council membership, encouraging species to reject integration in favor of a loosely affiliated collective with no central authority, no unified military doctrine, and no overarching governance structure. That sounds like a description, not a threat, someone called from the audience, Councillor Thane. His voice carried across the chamber with deliberate calm. Vrax's form flickered. It threatens stability. Already, 2 council members have formally withdrawn their membership to join this network. 7 more have filed preliminary withdrawal paperwork. If this continues, the council's authority will be undermined, our trade networks will fragment, and the peace we've maintained will collapse. Or, Thane said, standing to his full imposing height, species are exercising their sovereign right to determine their own governance structure. Unless you're suggesting that council membership is mandatory, that species are not free to leave. Species are free to leave, Vrax said quickly, too quickly. But this organized exodus is clearly being orchestrated by humanity as an attack on council legitimacy. Is it, or are species simply choosing an alternative when one becomes available? Thane walked toward the central podium. The council has always maintained that membership is voluntary, that we offer a choice between security with us or vulnerability alone. Now the humans have created a third option, security through cooperation rather than integration. If species prefer that option, shouldn't we respect their choice? The chamber erupted in debate. Some representatives agreed with Vrax that the network represented a threat. Others argued with Thane that species had the right to choose their governance. Still others seemed uncertain, caught between competing principles of sovereignty and stability. Admiral Chen watched the council session from Earth, the transmission delayed by several light hours but still fascinating to observe. Dr. Webb sat beside her, analyzing the various representatives' reactions. Vraxt is losing control of the narrative, Webb observed. Half the chamber is already questioning whether this is actually a threat or just species exercising their rights. Thane is systematically dismantling her argument. Thane has been sympathetic to us from the beginning, Chen said. But I'm not sure even he expected things to move this fast. We've gone from rejected applicants to existential threat in less than 3 years. Is that a problem? It's a concern. Rapid change creates instability. Instability creates opportunities for people to do stupid things. Chen gestured at the holographic display showing the galaxy. The Council has maintained peace for 4,000 years. That's worth something. If our network causes that peace to collapse, we'll be responsible for whatever follows. Are you having second thoughts? I'm having all the thoughts. That's my job. Chen stood and paced the observation room. We rejected Council membership because we believed humanity should control its own destiny. That principle still holds, but we've also created a movement that's bigger than us now. Other species are making their own choices based on our example. We have some responsibility for the consequences. Back in the council chamber, the debate continued. Vraxt had proposed sanctions against network members, trade restrictions, denial of access to council technology, possibly even military action against species that formally withdrew from council membership. Thane opposed every proposal. You're proving exactly what the humans accused us of, that council membership isn't voluntary, that it's submission disguised as integration. Every sanction you propose tells species that leaving has consequences, that we punish independence. We must maintain order, Vraxt insisted. Order maintained through coercion isn't order, it's oppression. The Borillian Empire learned that lesson the hard way. We tried to maintain an empire through force, and it collapsed because subjected species eventually rebelled. The Council has lasted 4,000 years because species joined willingly. Start forcing them to stay, and we become what we claimed we'd never be. A new voice entered the debate, Councillor Cyrex of the Althian Concordat, a species known for neutrality and careful diplomacy. Perhaps we are approaching this incorrectly. The network exists because we have created conditions that make it appealing. Species choose it over council membership. Rather than punishing that choice, perhaps we should examine why they're making it. Are you suggesting we change council policy to compete with this network? Vraxt asked, her tone suggesting the idea was absurd. I'm suggesting we remember that the council was founded on principles of mutual benefit and voluntary cooperation. If species are choosing an alternative, either that alternative offers something we don't, or we failed to deliver on our original promises. Cyrex's hologram gestured at the display showing network territory. The humans offer independence, local control, and respect for unique species characteristics. What do we offer? Safety and technology, yes. But at the cost of sovereignty and cultural integration. For some species, that trade is no longer acceptable. The chamber fell quiet. Cyrex had articulated what many representatives had been thinking but hadn't said aloud. The Council's offer hadn't changed in 4,000 years, but perhaps the galaxy had. So we do nothing? Vraxt asked. We watch as our membership fragments and our authority crumbles. We adapt, Cyrex said simply. As the humans have adapted, as any successful civilization must adapt. The emergency session concluded without resolution. No sanctions were approved, but no solutions were found either. The Council was paralyzed, caught between its principles and its fears, unable to suppress the network without betraying everything it claimed to represent, but unwilling to accept the network's existence without resistance. 3 months after the emergency session, something unexpected happened. The Kresh Dominion, emboldened by what they perceived as Council weakness, launched a massive raid into Council space. 30 warships attacked a Thurian colony world, betting that the Council's internal divisions would slow their response. They were partially right. The Council's response was slower than usual, bogged down by debates about jurisdiction and authority. The Thurian collective wanted to respond with overwhelming force. Other species argued for measured retaliation. The discussion took hours while the colony burned. The network responded in minutes. Admiral Chen authorized immediate military deployment to assist the Thurian colony. It wasn't Council space, and the Thurian weren't network members, but the precedent mattered. The network had been formed for mutual defense. If they only defended their own members while watching Council species suffer, they'd be no better than the Council that ignored independent species problems. Humanity sent 6 warships. The Dretchen sent 4. The Vax deployed 3 defense platforms. Together with whatever Thurian forces could respond locally, they engaged the Kresh fleet in the largest space battle in recent history. The battle lasted 6 hours. The Kresh had numerical superiority and were fighting with desperation, knowing they'd committed to an attack that would either establish their dominance or break their power. The defending forces had mixed doctrines, imperfect coordination, and were technically fighting to protect people who weren't their allies. They won anyway. The Kresh fleet was destroyed or scattered. The colony was saved, though heavily damaged. And the galaxy watched as independent species fought to protect a council member with no expectation of reward or payment, simply because it was the right thing to do. The implications rippled across civilized space. Counselor Vraxt watched recordings of the battle with emotions she couldn't quite name. Gratitude that the colony had been saved. Humiliation that it took independent species to do what the Council should have done. Confusion about how to process the fact that humanity had just saved Thurian lives. Thane appeared beside her holographic projection. The humans helped us. I noticed. They had no obligation, no treaty commitment, no expectation of compensation. They simply acted because the situation required action. Thane's multiple eyes focused on the tactical replay. That's what the network offers, not bureaucracy or hierarchy or political maneuvering, just species helping each other because it's mutually beneficial. You're suggesting we should admire them for doing what should be obvious. I'm suggesting we've become so focused on procedures and protocols that we've forgotten the fundamental principle that should drive any civilization. When people need help, you help them. The humans remember that. Perhaps we need to remember it too. Vraxt was silent for a long moment. What do you propose? I propose we stop seeing the network as a threat and start seeing it as an opportunity. The Council and the network aren't enemies. We're both trying to create stability and prosperity. We just have different approaches. Maybe there's room for both. On Earth, Admiral Chen received a message she'd never expected to see. A formal communication from Counselor Thane, transmitted through official channels, requesting a diplomatic meeting between council representatives and network leadership. Not a demand, a request, with respect and acknowledgement of the network's legitimacy. "They're actually willing to talk," Dr. Webb said, reading the message over Chen's shoulder. "No preconditions, no demands that we disband, just an invitation to discuss how the council and the network might coexist." "It's a trap," Chen said automatically. "Maybe, or maybe the Thurian rescue changed some minds. We proved we're not just independent. We're capable of cooperation for mutual benefit. That's harder to dismiss than our previous achievements." Chen thought about the battle, about human crews risking their lives to save Thurian civilians they'd never met, about Dretchen warriors fighting alongside former enemies, about Vax platforms coordinating with species whose biology they barely understood. The network had been formed out of necessity, a defensive alliance against a galaxy that seemed hostile to independence. But somewhere along the way, it had become something more. A demonstration that different species could work together without submitting to a central authority. That cooperation and sovereignty weren't mutually exclusive. "Schedule the meeting," Chen decided. "But make it clear we're not negotiating our dissolution. We're discussing coexistence. The network exists. That's not up for debate. What we're willing to discuss is how both the Council and the network can operate in the same galaxy without constant conflict." The meeting was held on a neutral station in unclaimed space. Both sides brought their key leaders. For the Council, Vraxt, Thane, and Cyrex. For the network, Chen, representatives from the Dretchen and Vax, and surprisingly, a Sorny delegate who traveled specifically to participate. The atmosphere was tense but professional. These weren't enemies meeting to discuss surrender terms. These were competing organizations trying to find a way to coexist. Vrax spoke first. "The Council has maintained galactic peace for 4 millennia. We will not allow that peace to be threatened by fragmentation and competing power structures." "Then you'll need to accept that the network isn't threatening your peace," Chen responded. "We're not trying to destroy the Council. We're offering an alternative for species that don't fit the Council model. There's room for both of us." "How? You're actively recruiting Council members to withdraw." "We're not recruiting anyone. We're simply existing as an option. If Council members choose to leave, that's a statement about the Council, not about us. Maybe you should ask why they're leaving instead of trying to prevent them." Thane intervened before Vraxt could respond. "The Council has become rigid. We've maintained the same structure, the same policies, the same approach for so long that we've forgotten how to adapt. The network succeeds because it's flexible, responsive, willing to change based on members' needs. Perhaps we have something to learn from that." "Are you suggesting the Council should restructure itself?" Cyrex asked. "I'm suggesting we should consider what the network offers that we don't. Local autonomy, respect for cultural uniqueness, defensive cooperation without integration. These aren't revolutionary concepts. They're principles the Council once valued but has slowly abandoned in favor of uniformity and efficiency." The discussion continued for hours. Debates about sovereignty, security, trade, technology sharing. Gradually, a framework emerged, not a merger or integration, but a recognition that both organizations could exist simultaneously. The Council would continue serving species that wanted centralized governance and integrated systems. The network would serve species that prioritized independence and local control. There would be overlap. Some species might be members of both, participating in Council trade while maintaining network defense agreements. There would be conflicts. Disagreements about jurisdiction and authority were inevitable, but open warfare could be avoided if both sides committed to diplomacy and mutual respect. "This is unprecedented," Vraxt said when the basic framework had been outlined. "The Council has never officially recognized a competing power structure." "Then maybe it's time the Council grew up," Chen said bluntly. "You've had a monopoly on interstellar governance for 4,000 years. That's remarkable, but monopolies don't last forever. The galaxy is big enough for multiple approaches to civilization. You can resist that reality and create conflict, or you can accept it and work toward peaceful coexistence." "You're very direct for a diplomat." "I'm not a diplomat. I'm a military officer who's been forced into diplomacy by circumstances. I prefer direct communication to political dancing." Surprisingly, Vraxt's form pulsed with what the translation matrix interpreted as amusement. "That much is clear. Very well. The Council will propose a framework for coexistence to our members. I cannot guarantee it will be accepted, but I will support it. The network has proven itself capable, responsible, and now willing to cooperate. Those are qualities we should acknowledge, not suppress. The meeting ended with tentative agreement. Nothing was finalized. Both organizations needed to present the framework to their members. But for the first time since humanity rejected council membership, there was a path forward that didn't end in conflict. 2 years later, the framework had evolved into a formal agreement. The council and the network maintained separate governance structures, but cooperated on security, trade, and research. Species could join one, both, or neither based on their needs and preferences. The galaxy had become more complex, more diverse, less unified but paradoxically more stable. Humanity's original 14 colony worlds had grown to 32. The network had expanded to 47 member species. The Council had restructured its policies to address the concerns that had driven species toward independence. Both organizations had adapted and grown through competition and cooperation. Admiral Chen stood in her office on Earth, looking at a holographic display showing human space. Ambassador Krell entered, carrying a data tablet with the latest diplomatic reports. The Council has formally invited humanity to reconsider membership, Krell said, under new terms that would allow significant autonomy and respect for cultural sovereignty. It's actually a reasonable offer. And our response? The same as before, thank you but no. Humanity has found its own path, we're doing well on it, we don't need the Council's protection or permission anymore. Chen smiled. 4 years ago, that statement would have been bravado, confidence masking fear that we'd made a terrible mistake. Now it's just fact. We're independent, successful, and secure, on our own terms. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd joined the Council? If we'd accepted Vraxt's original offer? Sometimes, probably we'd be comfortable, safe, stagnant, following someone else's rules and calling it freedom. Chen turned from the display. Humanity has always been difficult to govern. We question authority, resist conformity, make things complicated because we insist on doing them our own way. That frustrates civilizations that value order and efficiency. But it works for us. It works for us because we've always been willing to fail on our own terms rather than succeed on someone else's. That's what we proved to the galaxy. Independence isn't just refusing to submit. It's being capable enough that submission becomes unnecessary. Krell set down his tablet. For what it's worth, I was wrong 4 years ago. I thought rejecting the Council was suicide. I was convinced we'd be destroyed or absorbed within a year. Instead, we changed the galaxy. We reminded the galaxy that there are alternatives. That's all. The Council had forgotten that their way wasn't the only way. We forced them to remember. And in doing that, we made both the Council and the network better. On the Council station, Councillor Vraxt reviewed the same reports from a different perspective. The Council's membership had stabilized after an initial wave of withdrawals. New species were still joining, attracted by Council resources and stability. But they were joining under revised terms that respected sovereignty more than the old system had. Thane joined her at the observation port, watching stars wheel past the station. The humans changed us, Vraxt said quietly. Their rejection forced the Council to reconsider everything we'd taken for granted. Change isn't always bad. No, but it's uncomfortable. 4,000 years of stability, shattered by one species refusing to conform. Vraxt's form cycled through contemplative colors. Do you think they knew what they were starting? When Admiral Chen rejected our offer, did she understand the implications? I think she knew exactly what she was starting. Humans are remarkably good at understanding consequences and doing things anyway. Thane gestured at the stars. The galaxy needed this, Vraxt. We become too comfortable, too certain of our approach. The humans reminded us that there are always alternatives, always new paths to explore. That's valuable, even when it's inconvenient. Are you suggesting we should be grateful to them? I'm suggesting we should learn from them. They saw a system that didn't work for them and built something better rather than accepting inadequacy. That's innovation. That's progress. That's exactly what the galaxy needs to avoid stagnation. Vraxt was quiet for a long moment. I never thanked them for saving our colony, for proving that the network could be a force for good rather than just opposition to the Council. It's not too late. Across the void of space, messages traveled at light speed, carrying diplomacy, trade agreements, military coordination, and the daily business of civilizations learning to coexist. The Council continued its ancient work of governance. The network grew and adapted to its members' needs. Sometimes they cooperated, sometimes they competed. Always they coexisted, two different approaches to the same fundamental challenge of building civilization among the stars. Humanity had rejected Council diplomacy not because they hated the Council, but because they believed in charting their own course. That rejection had sparked changes neither humans nor the Council had fully anticipated. The galaxy was more diverse now, more complex, less unified, but ultimately stronger for having multiple voices contributing to its future. Admiral Chen had been right 4 years ago when she told the Council that humanity would forge its own path. What she hadn't predicted was that their path would inspire others to forge their own paths too, that their rejection would become a catalyst for galactic transformation. The Council had assumed humanity would fail and prove that their way was the only viable option. Instead, humanity had succeeded and proven that there were always alternatives, always new possibilities waiting for species brave or foolish enough to explore them. The galaxy would never be the same, and perhaps that was exactly what it needed.